Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. My question for Dr. Anders today is, I know they can be collected as 3 or 5, but of the 3 solas, the one that seems to be the least scary or the least controversial in all of my reading is Sola Gratia. And to the point where I'm actually struggling to see a difference between anything in sort of Protestant theology and anything that I've come across in Catholic. So I just wanted to ask, Dr. Anders' expertise, if there was a more subtle difference between why that was a sola that was drawn out as one of the 3 or the sort of 5 solas to challenge the Church.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. Sola Gratia, of course, means by grace alone, and it is a dogma of the Protestant faith that we are saved by grace alone. It is also a dogma of the Catholic faith that we are saved by grace alone. So do Catholics and Protestants mean the same thing by that phrase? And the answer is they do not mean the same thing by the phrase, because what they mean by grace is different. The meaning of grace is different. By and large, the Protestant tradition tends to understand grace as unmerited favor, that God extends benevolence to people who do not deserve it. Particularly, God extends forgiveness and the imputation of righteousness, so that God will, through his grace, regard as righteous those who are in fact unrighteous, so that you can go to heaven even though you remain morally alienated from God in your heart. Right?
Okay, all right.
And so the doctrine of grace in Protestantism is very closely allied to the doctrine of justification by faith alone. In the Catholic understanding of grace, grace clearly is unmerited favor in the sense that God benevolently reaches down and extends his grace to us, though we do not intrinsically deserve it. Mm-hmm. But the effect of grace is to make us meritorious. It is to change us, to create in us actually the likeness of God, to recreate in us, I should say, the image and likeness of God, so that we do in fact merit eternal life. Grace is transformative of us inwardly in a powerful way. It's not merely the imputation of Christ's righteousness. It is the infusion of Christ's righteousness whereby we actually become other Christs. The technical definition of grace or sanctifying grace in the Catholic tradition is that it is a participation in the divine nature in a created manner. St. Peter says that through the promises of Christ we become participants in the divine nature. We actually come to be made like God through this gift of grace. Now you'll find those accents from time to time in Protestantism, but they're really downstream of justification. So there is definitely a difference in the way these things work out. Now, great book on the doctrines of grace and justification in the Western tradition that does a good job contrasting Catholic and Protestant understanding. It's actually by a Protestant scholar named Alistair McGrath, who's there with you in the UK. He's a professor at Oxford. The book is called Justitia Dei, and it's a 2-volume history of the doctrine of justification. So if you want deep insight into these differences, that'd be a good book.